Hi folks, it's me Michaela and welcome back to my channel. A few months ago now, I made a video where I attempted to solve a murder mystery, and while doing that process, I created a murder board on my living room wall. I will link that video for you in case you want to watch it. But ever since I made that video, I have had it in my brain how I would like to take that visual element and concept and apply something similar to explaining the entire plot of Wuthering Heights. And then I was like, why even stop there? Perhaps this will be the first video I make in a series of videos that I will call Chaotic Classics, where I read classic novels and then describe the entire plots for you. The plan and idea of it is that if you have read these books, this is just going to be a fun time. And if you haven't read these books, that this will also be a fun time, but hopefully you will understand everything that happens in the novel. The first book I will be talking about for this, obviously, is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. And this is just because I read this book for the first time, I think 2 years ago now. It has just stuck with me because this book is absolutely insane. So I was like, this could be so much fun. Also, the spoon is back. You might remember her from the murder mystery video. She is back to provide more of the vibes. So basically, Wuthering Heights takes place in two main locations, Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange. Because of that, I am going to be using the two locations as the main divider in talking about the plot. And then underneath each space, I will be putting the family tree kind of in order for who's living at each place. As people move back and forth, I will be moving them back and forth between the two places to explain the plot. If you're asking about this funky little box over here, this is what I am calling my character storage box, and this is where I'm going to be putting side characters who kind of come in and out, or if anybody is anywhere other than these two places, they may also end up in this box. It's kind of like a penalty box. You've been bad, you don't deserve to be on the real board. Do your time. That's kind of the general idea I have for explaining the plot of the book, and I'm hoping it's going to be successful. We're going to find out very soon, and by very soon, I mean right now. Let's talk about the entire plot of Wuthering Heights. The book actually begins in 1801, which we are going to be dubbing present day. Obviously, it is not present day. Does it look like I'm living in 1801? We start off with Mr. Lockwood. I'm just going to be putting the present day story above for the time being, just so that it doesn't get confused when we start talking about the previous times. So Mr. Lockwood is the new tenant of Thrushcross Grange. His landlord is the owner and lives at Wuthering Heights. So what this man decides to do is to go and visit Wuthering Heights, where he comes to meet his landlord, Heathcliff. Now, Heathcliff is not exactly friendly. He's not really giving, oh my god, welcome, I can't believe you're here, this is so nice, come on in. He's kind of more like, oh, I guess it's customary to let you in, isn't it? So I guess come on in. He lets Lockwood in the Wuthering Heights, and then he goes downstairs to where one of the servants is, Joseph. Joseph is taking like a really long time to go get wine or something from the basement, so like Heathcliff goes to go see what Joseph is doing, which just leaves Lockwood in this room in Wuthering Heights, and he's looking around, and literally like in every corner of this room there are dogs. Like dogs are everywhere. Any little shadow, any little corner, any little spot, there is a dog. And what does Lockwood decide to do with this situation? He decides to start making faces at the dogs. Okay, whatever, don't know why you'd be doing that. So he starts like teasing these dogs, and then the dogs rightfully get upset at him making faces at them and attacks him. So then he starts screaming because these dogs that he provoked attack him. And like Heathcliff and Joseph, they're really not hurry hard up the stairs to come save him from the dog attack. And instead, a housekeeper kind of like bursts into the room with a frying pan and like sets all the dogs down, you know, like it ends up being fine. He's fine. Again, Lockwood just like put this on himself. He stays for dinner, and the dinner is again fine. So he is like, oh, Mr. Heathcliff, this has been so lovely. I think I shall come back again tomorrow. And Heathcliff is like, no, you really don't need to do that. You really do not need to come back tomorrow. And so naturally, Lockwood comes back again tomorrow. And he gets there. It's like snowing. He doesn't think anything about this. And he probably should have, because he is somewhere that he just showed up like yesterday, does not know where he's living. And he's like on the moors. And he decides to walk over the Wuthering Heights for dinner, where he was not really invited, but decided to show up anyway. And he gets there and the gate is locked. And this man decides that he should just jump the gate. Doesn't take that as a sign either. He sees Joseph there and he's like, oh, where's Heathcliff? And Joseph's like, Heathcliff isn't here. And then just like leaves. So then Lockwood is like stuck outside and he's like, what am I supposed to do? At that point, this young man kind of comes around and he's like, come on, like, I'll show you into the house. So he's shown into the house where another woman, who he assumes is Mrs. Heathcliff, and this is Mrs. Heathcliff, she doesn't speak to him. Like, it's like really Akko Taco at Wuthering Heights right now. And I mean, as it should be. I don't know what Lockwood expected to happen. Like, he showed up uninvited to a place where he had to jump the fence to get himself in. So Heathcliff arrives and then is like, oh, Lockwood's here, wonderful. And Lockwood is like, oh, it was so nice, I've met your wife. And Heathcliff is like, that's not my wife. That's my son's wife. And then he's like, oh, so this young man is your son then. And Heathcliff is like, that's not my son. And Lockwood is like, okay. He like stays for dinner and then he decides, you know, like, oh, I should head home. But then he looks out the door and it's like, oh, there's a snowstorm. It's almost like it was snowing earlier and now I can't see anything. So he's like, can anybody tell me the way home? Can you give me a little hint? Nobody's helping him. He's like, oh, maybe I could stay the night. And people are like, no. And he's like, so how am I supposed to get home then? And people are like, that's not our problem. Lockwood like goes outside, finds a lantern and is like, I guess I'll find my way home. But then Joseph says that he's stealing this lantern. So then he gets attacked by dogs 2 days in a row. He ends up back in Wuthering Heights. And there we learn that this housekeeper's name is Zilla. And Zilla is like, okay, look, I'll show you to a room. Don't tell anybody I'm doing this, okay? You can stay the night in here. She leads into this room. It's like clearly nobody goes in here. It's a little like creepy. Lockwood is like, look, it's a place to sleep. Great. Inside this room, it's like there's this big like cabinet that is a bed. I don't know exactly why you wouldn't just have a bed in the room, but there's like the bed is a cabinet. So there's doors on the bed. So he decides to climb into this cabinet bed. He looks on like the windowsill because there's a windowsill, and on the windowsill is just like Catherine Earnshaw, Catherine Linton, and Catherine Heathcliff just written over and over and over again. And there's also some old books. So he's like, let me peruse these books here. When he opens the books, he realizes that like in all of the margins of the book, on every blank page that could be found, there is writing, like a diary. And it's of a girl named Catherine, and she's talking about growing up at Wuthering Heights and how like it wasn't that fun of experience, and she was there with Heathcliff. So clearly Mr. Lockwood here assumes that this must be someone Heathcliff grew up with. And he ends up dozing off while reading this book. He has this nightmare where Joseph takes him to see the world's longest sermon at church. One thing to know about Joseph: this man loves the Bible. Nobody has loved the Bible as much as Joseph has loved the Bible. So Lockwood has this nightmare that Joseph brings him to the longest sermon on earth. And when he decides to protest, everybody in the church attacks him. So he wakes up from this dream and he hears like this like rat-tatting on the window pane. And he's like, oh, there are tree branches hitting the window pane. I should remove these branches so they stop hitting the window pane and I can fall asleep again. But the window is like soldered shut, so he like breaks the window to go reach outside to grab these branches. Instead of grabbing branches, he grabs a cold dead hand. This cold dead hand belongs to a child who says her name is Kathy and to let her inside. Heathcliff, it's me, I'm Kathy, I've come home, I'm so cold, let me in your window. Anyway, Mr. Lockwood is like, oh, no thank you, and like pries the little fingers off of him, and then just piles a bunch of books in front of the window so that the ghost child in the outdoors can't get in. And of course this makes a bunch of noise, and who comes into the room but Heathcliff? And Heathcliff is like, who's in here? So Lockwood climbs out of his little bed cabinet, and then Heathcliff is like, what are you doing in here? Who let you in here? And he's like, Zilla. But I'm not that thankful to her because clearly this room is haunted, okay? This little girl named Kathy just tried to attack me through a window. Lockwood's like, I'm leaving. So he heads to go find downstairs, but while he's leaving, he hears Heathcliff in the room going out the window to like scream like, Kathy! Come in, Kathy, come home! Just like that, that's exactly what Heathcliff's voice is like. Lockwood then eventually finds his own way downstairs. Everybody else in the house is up and like downstairs, despite the fact that it's 4 a.m. I guess everybody just wakes up at 4 a.m. at Wuthering Heights, and he just is sitting around because he still doesn't really know what to do. And eventually Heathcliff comes downstairs, and Lockwood witnesses Heathcliff almost hit Mrs. Heathcliff, and he's like, I think I'm gonna head home now, okay, bye, because he's like, I don't want to be in this place anymore. And then Heathcliff reluctantly says that he will show Lockwood back to Thrushcross Grange because otherwise the man is going to kill himself trying to get his way back here across the moors. Lockwood is now back at the Grange, and because of his visiting Wuthering Heights without being invited in the middle of a snowstorm, he then gets sick. So he's like stuck in bed, and he's like, I'm really bored and I'm really lonely and I'm stuck in bed because I'm sick because I went to a dinner I wasn't invited to. So Mrs. Dean, the housekeeper, you said you've been working here for 18 years. Can you tell me all of the gossip because I'm bored? And then Mrs. Dean is like, well, I can tell you about the people over at Wuthering Heights, okay? Mrs. Heathcliff is not Heathcliff's wife. She is Heathcliff's son's wife, and she was born Catherine Linton, who was the daughter of the master who used to own Thrushcross Grange. And then that young man who you thought was Heathcliff's son is not Heathcliff's son, but actually his nephew, and then also Mrs. Heathcliff's cousin. Also, Mrs. Heathcliff's dead husband, who was Heathcliff's son, is also her cousin. And Mr. Lockwood is like, please tell me more. And Mrs. Dean is like, great news, honey. I've been around for so long. I can give you the gossip for the last like 25, 30 years. So let's go. So now that we're going back in time, I'm going to take all of these present day people down so that it doesn't get too confusing, but I'll leave Lockwood and Mrs. Dean up here because we'll come back to them. So our story begins at Wuthering Heights, and we learn that Mrs. Dean's name is Ellen. She was at Wuthering Heights as a child because her mother was a servant there and everybody called her Nelly. And so at Wuthering Heights, there was Mr. Earnshaw, Mrs. Earnshaw, and then their 2 children, Hindley and Catherine Earnshaw. One day, Mr. Earnshaw is like, I am going on a journey to Liverpool, and I am going to be walking there. So I will be gone for 3 days. Children, what would you like as gifts? And so Hindley is like, I want a fiddle. And Catherine is like, I want a whip for her horse, not for like beating people up. And so Mr. Earnshaw goes on his trip to Liverpool, okay? And he's like late coming back, but he does come back. And when he does, he's like, oh my God, Catherine, Hindley, it's so great to see you. So wonderful. Yay. I actually don't have your gifts because I lost your whip and your fiddle is broken. But I did bring home this random boy I found, and I'm going to name him Heathcliff. So Heathcliff is described as being dark-skinned. That's kind of important to note just because it's quite obvious that his appearance has a lot to do with the way he is treated, and then as a result the way he ends up treating others. I think the other fun thing to note is that Heathcliff does not have a last name. He is just Heathcliff. He's like Madonna. So he brings home this boy. Hindley is really mad because this boy is clearly not a fiddle and he does not like him. Catherine, however, becomes pretty quick friends with Heathcliff and they become very inseparable, and the two of them are menaces to society. You know, Catherine is described as being like a very wicked child. She's not very nice. And Heathcliff, they're like attached at the hip. They do everything together. So a couple years after bringing Heathcliff home, he's around 8 years old. They're thinking, they don't actually know how old he is, when they find him and bring him home. So a couple years later, Mrs. Earnshaw, she died. Heathcliff also got the measles and he almost died, but he didn't because Nelly brought him back to health so well by nursing him. Mrs. Earnshaw was like never a huge fan of Heathcliff, but she wasn't like absolutely atrocious to him. Mr. Earnshaw particularly really liked Heathcliff, and this almost made Hindley, I assume, kind of like him even less. And of course, Cathy and Heathcliff were inseparable. Hindley, because he hates Heathcliff so much, he like bullies him and insults him and is really mean to him all the time and beats him up and stuff. But because Mr. Earnshaw liked Heathcliff, Heathcliff could kind of like talk him into doing whatever he wanted. He was very smart and cunning as a child. Then Mr. Earnshaw gets kind of sickly, and what happens is they decide to send Hindley off to college to become educated. He's all edumacated. So then it's just Catherine, Heathcliff, and Earnshaw in the house, along with the servants, Nelly, and then the other main servant is... oh, my hair is Joseph. He's just always been at Wuthering Heights, and he's always been obsessed with the Bible. They're all sitting around the fire one day, and they're like, oh, Father, you've been up for so long. You should go to bed. But Mr. Earnshaw cannot go to bed because Mr. Earnshaw is dead. He died right in front of Heathcliff and Cathy. It's very upsetting. Hindley comes home for the funeral, and when he comes home for the funeral, he brings a wife with him, the new Mrs. Earnshaw. She's a little bit of a weirdo, okay? She's a little all over the place, a little bit of an oddball. She has a lot of very strong emotions. She is like super happy and, you know, really bubbly. She is like, oh my God, Catherine, we're sisters. I love you. This is so great. But then she also will then start crying and is like terrified of death. That's kind of like a rough time for her. She also tells Hindley that she doesn't really like Heathcliff. So Hindley, because he already hates Heathcliff, hearing that his wife dislikes him, says, Heathcliff, you will now live as a servant. Get out of the house. You are no longer going to be educated, and instead you will just be doing manual labor in the fields and such. You are basically kicked out. And then also after a while, Mrs. Earnshaw doesn't like Cathy because, as we have already described, Catherine is a menace. She is a wicked child, and people after a while end up not liking her because she is mean. Cathy would spend all of her time with Heathcliff because she's obsessed with him. She would try and teach him everything that she's been learning so that he can stay educated, but Hindley is always like punishing them for being together, but it never really works. It never actually separates them. They just keep seeing each other all the time because they're inseparable. One day, they both run away. Okay, Catherine, Heathcliff run away. Ooh, where did they go? They're in the penalty box. And Hindley is like, cool, they're gonna run away. I'm gonna lock them outside so they can't come back in. He tells Nelly this, that like he's locking all the doors, don't let them in. But Nelly is like, oh, that's like a little mean. So she leaves her window open so that she can hear when they come back, so she can like let them in. Who comes back is just Heathcliff and not Cathy. Heathcliff then tells her the story of what's happened, and it is that Catherine and Heathcliff, they went over to Thrushcross Grange because they wanted to see if the children living there, if their lives were as horrible as Cathy and Heathcliff's. At Thrushcross Grange, we have Mr. Linton, Mrs. Linton, and then there are two children, Edgar and Isabella. Cathy and Heathcliff, they spy through the window at Edgar and Isabella, and they are laughing at them because the two kids are fighting over this puppy. And they're like, look at these privileged little children who are not abused in their home. Ha ha ha, how funny they are. And they end up being heard while they're laughing, so they try to run away. But Cathy gets bitten by the Linton's dog, who I made a sticky note for just because I find his name really funny. The dog's name is Skulker. And so Skulker bites Cathy because the dog is like set on them while they run away. And Cathy's like, Heathcliff, save yourself, run! But he won't leave her. And then the people at the Grange end up recognizing Catherine as the girl from Wuthering Heights. And so the Lintons are like, oh no, Cathy, look at this dog bite on your ankle from our dog Skulker. So Cathy was brought into the Grange so they could take care of her, but they would not let in Heathcliff. They don't like Heathcliff because he's Heathcliff. Heathcliff is forced to go back to Wuthering Heights with no Kathy. And Skulker is going to go in the penalty box. So I have no idea when we will ever need him again. So Kathy ends up staying at Thrushcross Grange, recovering from her dog bite for 5 weeks, and doesn't come home until it's basically Christmas. So she's finally back home at the Heights, but now that she's back home, she's like a proper little lady now. Like, she was with the Lintons and now she got manners. So that's nice. And while she was away, Hindley has banned Heathcliff from ever talking to Kathy again because he's really mad at him for being Heathcliff. When she first comes back, Hindley does say, Heathcliff, you can come say hi to Kathy, but Kathy is so proper and all that, and says that, like, oh, Heathcliff, you can also be proper. And then Heathcliff says, and I quote, I like being dirty. And then he runs away and he avoids everybody. So then Christmas is coming. And because the Lintons have been so nice, taking care of Kathy, the Lintons have been invited for Christmas. I would bring them all over here, but that is way too much effort. So this entire household is now at Wuthering Heights for this scene. Just imagine that. The Lintons and Hindley and Kathy, they all go to church. And then while they're at church, Nelly tells Heathcliff, she's like, Heathcliff, I could help you clean up and look good if you want, but Heathcliff ignores her. I like being dirty. But after a while, he does ask for her help because he wants to talk to Kathy, and Kathy's all proper now. So Nelly helps, clean him up and make him presentable. And when the Lintons and everybody comes back from church at Christmas, Heathcliff comes, but when he's going to say hi to everybody, Hindley catches him and shoves him back into the kitchen. And then we get this wonderful scene where Nelly says that Heathcliff is just trying to get his share of dinner. And Hindley says, he shall have his share of my hand, because he is going to hit him. So then Edgar, peeks his head into the kitchen at Wuthering Heights because he's like, what's going on in here, He sees Heathcliff, he immediately just insults him. And as a result, Heathcliff hits Edgar, and then Hindley has him forced to be locked upstairs because he hit their guest who insulted him. Nelly sees Kathy sneak upstairs to go and talk to Heathcliff, and because Nelly is known as a nosy little meddler, she also sneaks upstairs to overhear them talking. So she's like listening on their conversation, and then after a while tells Kathy that she has to leave because, Hindley's coming up the stairs or something. The Lintons are leaving, like she has to reappear. She can't be seen up there with Heathcliff anymore. So Kathy leaves, and then later that night, Nelly does sneak Heathcliff down into the kitchen so he can have some food. And while she is giving him some food, Heathcliff says how he wants revenge on Hindley because he hates him. At this point in the present day, Mrs. Dean is like, oh my god, I've been talking for so long, but Lockwood is like, no, keep going, I'm still sick and bored. So Nelly skips her story to the next summer, where we learn that Mrs. Earnshaw, whose name is Frances, and Hindley have a baby, and this baby is named Hareton. And when the baby is born, the other servants come to Nelly and they're like, Nelly, oh my god, there's a baby, but you're gonna have to take care of it because Frances is gonna die. Kind of tragic. She's not gonna last the year. You're gonna have to raise this child, Nelly. Frances is pretty sickly post childbirth, but Hindley is very much in denial about this. He's like, Frances is not dying. Frances is so healthy. Look at her. She's so happy. How could she be dying? And then Frances dies. After Frances dies, Hindley, he really doesn't take this well, the whole his wife is dead thing. And he becomes a very mean drunk. And he's so mean that everybody who works at Wuthering Heights, except for Nelly and Joseph, leave. So now they are the only servants at Wuthering Heights because Hindley is just a really mean guy. Cool. Now, because Hindley is so mean, also nobody comes to visit, except for every now and then, Edgar will come to visit Kathy. They are now 15 years old at this point. So we come to note that Kathy, is back to being her wicked, cruel, mean, menace self whenever she's home. But when Edgar is visiting, she puts on her act as the proper little lady. This day that Hindley is going to be away, Kathy is like, I'm going to invite Edgar, and if anybody asks, I'm going to just say that I didn't invite him and he just happened to show up to visit me while Hindley was away. Heathcliff, also knowing Hindley is away, he's like kind of upsetty spaghetti about this because he thought that he and Catherine were going to spend the day together, but now Catherine is like, no, I'm going to spend it with Edgar because he's going to come visit me. And Heathcliff gets pouty and like leaves in anger. So Edgar shows up at Wuthering Heights to visit Kathy, and while he's here, Nelly is also in the room because she's been told by Hindley to make sure that Kathy and Edgar are not left in a room together alone. So Nelly is like over in the corner. She's like dilly-dallying around, and baby Hareton is there because of course Nelly is raising Hareton, so he's kind of like always wherever Nelly is. So Nelly is like dilly-dallying. Let me dust this table 16 times very sneakily in the corner. And Kathy is like, Nelly, can you please do that elsewhere? Like, why are you here? Please leave. And Nelly is like, oh no, I have to do this. I can't leave. Sorry. And Kathy gets so mad at this that she slaps Nelly. Okay. And then Edgar is like, Kathy, I'm shocked. And then Hareton, okay, starts crying because Nelly's just been slapped in the face and he likes Nelly. And then so Kathy then goes to Hareton and she goes to hit Hareton, but then Edgar steps in the way and instead Kathy hits Edgar. She just smacks him in the face. And then Edgar is like, wow. Nelly grabs the baby, decides I'm gonna leave the room, but again, because she's a nosy little meddler, she's gonna be eavesdropping at the door, okay? And she hears Kathy and Edgar's conversation. And Kathy is like, Edgar, I don't even know what you're talking about. I didn't even hit anybody on purpose. Why would I do that? I can't believe you would say that to me. And I'm so upset now that you're saying you're going to leave that I'm going to get physically ill from being so upset and start crying. So then she starts crying. And then Edgar, okay, reluctantly then is like, you know what, Kathy, you're right. I can't leave you. I'm sorry. And now they're lovers. Somehow that's the conclusion of those events. That now they are in love. After declaring their love, Edgar goes back to the Grange. Hindley then comes home later that evening. And normally, Nelly always tries to hide Hareton from Hindley because Hindley will either absolutely adore Hareton and be like, you are so amazing, I love you, my child, or he'll be so mad at seeing him that he will be abusive towards his child because he misses Frances so much and I guess links Hareton to his dead wife. And he's drunk and sad and mean. So Nelly is trying to hide Hareton, but she can't hide him away before Hindley finds him. And Hindley grabs his son and is dangling him from the top of the stairs, like over the railing to down below. A one-story drop of the child. He ends up losing his balance and as a result drops his child over the stair railing. But luckily, okay, who happens to just be moseying out from under there at the exact same moment is Heathcliff, and he instinctually catches Hareton so he does not die. But Heathcliff is kind of upset about this because he's like, I hate Hindley, and if I just let his son die, like that would have been great revenge, but now I can't really get away with just murdering this child in my arms. So that's kind of upset. He's like not too happy about being the hero here. Nelly then takes Hareton into the kitchen to calm him down post almost dying from stair drop, and Heathcliff is also in the kitchen. He's like lying down on a bench. Future Nelly says that at the time she did not know he was there. Now, because Nelly is such a nosy meddler and a pot stirrer, I almost wonder if she did know he was there and she just doesn't say anything. So Nelly's in the kitchen. Heathcliff is like hidden away in the kitchen. And Kathy comes in. And Kathy goes to Nelly. She's like, Nelly, I need you to give me some advice, okay? Because Edgar, okay, he's proposed. And I want you to tell me what I should do. And they have like this big conversation about like love and like, why do you love him? Blah, 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 da, 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 da. And Catherine, she has very, surface level reasons for loving Edgar. It's like he's pretty and he's rich. And Nelly is like, well, that is absolutely no reason to marry him. And Kathy is like, I know, but it actually doesn't matter what you say because I already told him yes. But I feel in my soul it's wrong to marry Edgar because I love Heathcliff. And quote, whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same, end quote. But she can't marry Heathcliff. At this point in the conversation that he's overhearing, Heathcliff decides tries to get up and leave. And Nelly sees him leave and claims this is when she saw him there. I have doubts about this. I feel like Nelly knew Heathcliff was there the whole time and just wanted to see what Kathy was going to say so that he'd overhear it, because she's a pot stirrer. She loves the drama. Anyway, she then sees Heathcliff leave before Catherine can say like the nice stuff about why she can't marry Heathcliff. And instead Heathcliff thinks that Kathy just actually is like really mean and hates him. And Nelly then says, oh my god, Kathy, Heathcliff just heard everything that you said. So Kathy then runs out because she's like, oh no, I need to go find Heathcliff because Heathcliff has run away. He's gone. See ya. Kathy is out all night trying to find Heathcliff. She comes back the next morning and she is soaking wet because she was outside in the freezing rain all night trying to find Heathcliff, and she was not able to find him. And then because of this, she becomes ill. She is sick because she's about to be part of the family or whatever. Mr. and Mrs. Linton are like, oh my god, Kathy, you are sick. Come to Thrushcross Grange and we will care for you through your illness. Kathy then goes to the Grange to recover from her illness, which she does. Okay, it's very kind of Mr. and Mrs. Linton to care for her in her time of need. Unfortunately, Mr. and Mrs. Linton also get sick and die. That's what doing good deeds gets you, guys. Okay, you end up dying when you do nice things. That's the moral of this story. So 3 years after they die, Catherine and Edgar get married. So now Catherine Earnshaw is Catherine Linton. So at this point, back in present day, Mrs. Dean is like, oh my god, I've been talking for so long. Let me stop my storytelling and come back again another day. But Lockwood ends up being sick for 4 weeks. So guess what? Another day comes real soon. The story continues. Did you think we're going to stop here? Absolutely not. There's still so much story to go. When Catherine and Edgar got married, Nelly, she also moves to Thrushcross Grange with Catherine, okay? And everything seems to be going fine for a while, okay? It's like, wow, the Grange is so nice. There aren't drunk, mean people, and everybody seems to be happy. And then Nelly's out in the garden one day when Heathcliff shows up. This man's been away for 3 years and suddenly shows up in a garden. And he's like, oh my god, Nelly. And Nelly is like, Heathcliff? You've been away for 3 years, my dude? What's up? Where you been? What are you doing here? And he's like, let me in. I want to see Kathy. And so Heathcliff is invited into Thrushcross Grange. And Kathy is like, oh my god, it's Heathcliff. Oh my god, it's my best friend. He's back. And Edgar is like, not like that. He's like, I really actually wish that Heathcliff was not here. But my dear wife, Catherine, seems to be so happy that I'll deal with it. Heathcliff is like, look, I'm only going to stay an hour, okay? Because then I have to get back to the Heights where I'm staying. And Nelly is like, how the hell are you staying at Wuthering Heights? Everybody who is left there hates you. And this is when we learn that Hindley, Mr. Mean Drunk Man Hindley, apparently he really likes to play cards, but he's also not very good at it. So he's in a lot of debt. And somehow in the 3 years that Heathcliff has been away, he is now a rich man and he has bought the debts of Hindley. So now Hindley is in debt to Heathcliff. As a result, Heathcliff has forced his way into Wuthering Heights. You can say he's so far being quite successful with his revenge on Hindley. Heathcliff goes back to Wuthering Heights. The next day, Catherine and Isabella go to visit the Heights, and then after that, Heathcliff comes to visit the Grange, and Catherine, fairly often, he likes to call on her all the time, and Isabella has become quite infatuated with Heathcliff. And one day she's sitting down with Catherine and she's like, Catherine, you have been so mean to me because you never let me have any time with Heathcliff, even though he's such a nice gentleman and I am obsessed with him. We were all on a walk together and like you told me to go ahead just so I couldn't talk to Heathcliff. And Kathy then drops this banger of just saying, is she sane? And tells Isabella that I just thought you wouldn't be interested in the conversation we were having. And also, you really shouldn't love Heathcliff because he's actually a really bad guy. Like, he's really not nice and is actually most definitely would try to use you just to get back at your brother because he hates your brother. So you really should not love him. But Isabella, she's like pretty adamant. She's like, you're lying. Heathcliff is actually really nice. I don't know why you'd say he's so mean. You're friends with him. And so then the next time Heathcliff comes to visit the Grange, okay, Catherine and Isabella are there, and Catherine makes this point to force Isabella to stay in the room and then tell Heathcliff how Isabella is absolutely obsessed and in love with him. As a result, Isabella is like super embarrassed and like runs away. And then Heathcliff goes back home. 10 months after moving to the Grange, Nelly is out and about. You know, she's like going to the town or whatever to like buy some goods when she sees the apparition of Child Hindley and takes this as this huge sign that she needs to go to Wuthering Heights and see Hareton. Just accept it for what it is, okay? Nelly goes to Wuthering Heights, and she hasn't been here for 10 months, remember? So she finds Hareton outside, and Hareton is really like not how she remembers him. He doesn't even remember Nelly, and when she asks Hareton about Hindley, he calls him Devil Daddy, and Hareton is just like swearing all the time because he's learned it from Heathcliff. And so Nelly asks to see Hindley, but instead Heathcliff comes out, and then her reaction to this is to run away. For whatever reason. I don't know why she's just like so absolutely afraid of Heathcliff at this point, but she just runs away from him and then goes back to the Grange. Then Heathcliff is visiting the Grange yet again, and Nelly is like looking out the window. Isabella is out there. She is feeding the pigeons. Feed the birds, tuppence a bag. And this is because Isabella, she's been giving the silent treatment to Catherine because she's still mad at her for embarrassing her in front of Heathcliff. But then Heathcliff comes by and Isabella's in the garden, and Nelly sees Heathcliff with Isabella and he embraces her, and then afterwards Isabella runs away and then Heathcliff comes inside. Kathy and Heathcliff have a fight about this, and Heathcliff is like, Kathy, you're just jealous. You're just jealous that I'm not your husband. And Kathy is like, no, you're just trying to use Isabella to get revenge on Edgar. I'm not jealous. So then Nelly, again, being a pot stirrer, then goes and tells Edgar what she saw of Heathcliff and Isabella. So then Edgar shows up in the kitchen where they're fighting, okay? And he's like, Heathcliff, I'm going to ban you from the Grange immediately. You are going to leave. I'm going to go grab my servants to force you out. But before he can do that, Catherine locks the kitchen door, so they're all locked in the kitchen, and then threatens to swallow the key and then throws the key into the fire, okay, so that he can't go get servants to kick Heathcliff out. And then Heathcliff drops the absolute insult of a century by saying, Mr. Linton, who's Edgar at this point because Mr. Linton is dead, remember? Mr. Linton, I'm mortally sorry that you're not worth knocking over. So then Edgar, okay, punches Heathcliff and he leaves. He like goes out the other way. Don't know why he wouldn't just do this before, to get like his guns and servants. And Catherine is like, Heathcliff, please just leave. I don't want you to get shot and all that. So Heathcliff listens to her and he goes back to Wuthering Heights before Edgar can get a gun and shoot him. Bada bing, bada boom. Kathy, okay, she tells Nelly to tell Edgar that she's so upset about what's happened that she is going to get dreadfully sick and ill, and to tell him this so that he feels bad for what he just did with punching Heathcliff and like making a big scene and all that. And Nelly being like, wow, Catherine is just such a dramatic bitch. I'm absolutely not going to tell Edgar that. And instead, when Edgar comes back, Nelly again just eavesdrops on their conversation because she loves to do that. And she hears Edgar have this big speech of like, you either got to pick me or him, Catherine. Those are your choices. And then Catherine starts hitting her head on the sofa, like repeatedly. So after she calms down from the hitting her head on the sofa, she goes up to her room and locks herself in there and refuses to talk to anybody or eat. Edgar then tells Isabella that if she continues to try and have this relationship with Heathcliff, that their relationship as siblings is donezo. It's over. The next few days at the Grange are not exactly great. Isabella is like moping around and like super sad because like Heathcliff isn't coming back and she's like still in love with him. Catherine is of course locked in her room, refusing to eat or talk to anybody. And Edgar is just like hanging out in the library, reading books all day. So after 3 days of this, Catherine comes out of her room to Nelly and she's like, Nelly, Nelly, I need you to get me more water. Also, I think I'm dying. And Nelly is like, okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration. It's probably just because you refused to eat for 3 days. Let me get you some food. Okay. And then Catherine is like, is Edgar like super upset because I've been locked in my room? And Nelly is like, actually, he's just been like in the library every day. Catherine, caring about how indifferent Edgar apparently is to her state of being, is like super upset that he wouldn't be more upset that she's upset, I guess. And she says, what in the name of all that feels has he to do with books when I am dying? Because as we know, she believes she's dying. She then starts tearing a pillow apart with her teeth and becomes absolutely delirious. She's like opening windows even though it's the middle of winter and like trying to like jump out of them. And Nelly is like, oh my god, she's gonna jump out of a window. This is like making a huge ruckus. So then Edgar comes by and he sees this and then he's like, Nelly, I'm so upset that you would lie to me and not tell me the truth about Catherine's state and that she's so sick. Why would you keep this from me? I'm so mad. Nelly is then told to grab the doctor, Mr. Kenneth. And when Mr. Kenneth is showing up, he is telling Nelly about how, oh, you know, I saw Heathcliff and Isabella talking and saying how Heathcliff wants Isabella to like run away with him. And she said that she would be ready to leave like the next time he came, blah, 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 blah. And Nelly is like, oh my god. So Nelly goes to run to Isabella's room. And guess what? Isabella's not there. Isabella is MIA. What does Nelly do with this information? Absolutely nothing. She tells nobody that Isabella is missing. Instead, Catherine is being taken care of in her delirious state. They like manage to calm her down or whatever. And then Nelly again, she just doesn't tell anybody that Isabella ran away. The next morning, other people find out that Isabella is missing. And then Nelly is all, Isabella ran away with Heathcliff? This is brand new information to me. And upon hearing this information, Edgar is like, we're not going after her. Clearly, like, I have not disowned her. She has disowned me by leaving. He's all upset. Now his wife is like dying. His sister's gone. He's like kind of sad about it. And so the next 2 months, Edgar is taking care of Catherine, okay? And at this point, we also discover that she is pregnant. And so after like being in bed with Edgar taking care of her for 2 months, she decides that she's going to go down to the parlor. But then after getting into the parlor, she decides that she's actually never leaving the parlor ever again. And so then they have to make the parlor her bedroom. So now she's living in the parlor. Isabella, who is now living at Wuthering Heights as Heathcliff's wife, sends a letter to Edgar, which is like about 6 weeks later, but he never answers her. And then 2 weeks after that, because Edgar never answered her, she sends a letter to Nelly because she's like, I have no one else to send a letter to. Present day Nelly, for whatever reason, still has this letter on hand. Like, she just pulls this letter out of nowhere and is like, oh, hold on, I actually have this letter from like 20 years ago. Let me read it to you. The rest of this chapter of the book is just the letter from Isabella, where she's basically saying that she is married to Heathcliff and to tell her brother that she apologizes and that she's heard about Catherine being sick and she's sorry for that too, and then asked Nelly to come visit her at Wuthering Heights because it absolutely sucks here. Everybody is so mean. Oh my god, come save me. Nelly tells Edgar about how Isabella sent her a letter and she heard about Catherine and she's really sorry and she would really be happy if he could send a letter with his forgiveness with Nelly to Wuthering Heights. And Edgar is like, I'm not gonna be sending any letter, but sure, you can tell her when you get there that I forgive her, whatever, okay? Nelly then goes to visit Wuthering Heights, and when she gets there, Isabella is eagerly waiting for her and she's like, oh my god, where's my letter? And Nelly is like, there is no letter. And this like Akko Taco, Isabella was really hoping for a letter, but then there isn't one. Heathcliff comes in and he's like, look, Isabella hates me and I don't really know why, because I never lied to her about the fact that I actually didn't like her and I was actually just using her to get revenge on her brother Edgar, who I hate, and she is actually totally free to leave whenever she wants. To which Isabella says that she did try to leave and she would never attempt it again. So don't know exactly what happened there, but clearly nothing good. Heathcliff then tells Isabella to leave the room and he talks to Nelly saying that he wants Nelly to help him to see Kathy. And Nelly is like, look, if you actually care about Kathy, you would stay the hell away because she's a very delicate little flower right now and you would just upset her. Heathcliff is like, oh, okay, well, if you don't say you're going to help me go see Kathy, because I am 100% not going to stay away, I will actually just hold you here hostage at Wuthering Heights until you do say that you will help me visit Kathy. Nelly then, because she kind of doesn't have a choice in the matter, agrees to take a letter from Heathcliff and give it to Kathy and to help Heathcliff see Kathy the next time Edgar is out of the house. Then Nelly comes back. Also, Mr. Kenneth is no longer here. You get to go in the penalty box. So this point of the story on is actually Mr. Lockwood telling us the entire story that Mrs. Dean told him. This whole book is just a big game of telephone. Nelly is back at the Grange and she waits until Edgar has left before she has the nerve to give Kathy this letter from Heathcliff. Kathy is still super weak and like kind of out of it, and so she can't even like hold the letter, and then when she reads it doesn't seem to like comprehend what it is. So Nelly instead tells her that the letter is from Heathcliff and he wants to see her. It is also like a really nice day at the Grange, so like the doors are open to let like the fresh air in. So Heathcliff, being Heathcliff, he just walks himself into the house and is like, Kathy. Heathcliff immediately like embraces Kathy. He's like kissing her all over, and she tells him that it's his fault that she's dying because he and Edgar broke her heart and this is why she's dying. Catherine is very dramatic even in her illness. And Heathcliff says he forgives her for hurting him, but he cannot forgive her for hurting herself. And he says, I forgive what you have done to me. I love my murderer, but yours, how can I? He's basically saying that Catherine is causing her own death and he can never forgive her for that because she's dying and he doesn't want her to die. So then Edgar is coming home and Nelly's like, Heathcliff, you have to leave. So he's like, okay, Kathy, I have to go. Kathy won't let him leave. And she like gets all worked up. She ends up like fainting. So Nelly screams and then Edgar runs in and then finds Heathcliff. And then Heathcliff takes like the fainted Kathy and gives her to Edgar and then is like, take care of her before you get mad at me because, you know, she matters more, blah, 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 blah. And he goes to like wait outside to hear about how Kathy is. That night, Kathy gives birth to her child, who is also named Catherine Linton. And then a few hours later, Catherine, she dies. Then Nelly goes to tell Heathcliff, and Heathcliff is like, she's dead, isn't she? And Nelly is like, yes. And Heathcliff says that, noted to say that he calls her Catherine Earnshaw here and not Catherine Linton. He says that she's not going to rest in peace as long as he lives and that he wants her to haunt him because he doesn't want her to ever leave him. And he says, I cannot live without my life. I cannot live without my soul. And then he starts hitting his head against a tree until he starts bleeding. Totally normal behavior. Heathcliff, you know, goes home after hitting his head on a tree. So Edgar spends the next few days, you know, like by Catherine's coffin. When he finally leaves to get some rest, Heathcliff comes by and Nelly kind of lets him in so he can see Catherine's body. Catherine has this like locket on her that has a piece of her hair in it, and he takes her hair out and replaces it with like a lock of his own hair. Nelly knows this because she finds Catherine's hair on the floor and then takes Catherine and Heathcliff's hair and twists them together and put them both in the locket on Catherine. Kind of a cute moment. Then Heathcliff is back home. Hindley is invited to the funeral but never shows up. Isabella is not invited to the funeral, and Catherine is actually buried not at the graves for the Lintons or at the graves for the Earnshaws. She is buried on this hill that overlooks the moors. I'm back. I know it seems like I didn't go anywhere, but I needed to take a break because literally every single one of my devices was dying, and also my back hurt because apparently I'm becoming old. But where we just were was that Catherine died and Catherine was born. At this point, Nelly is now, for the second time in her life, taking care and raising a child that is not her own because the mother died. And so Nelly is at Thrushcross Grange 3 weeks post Catherine birth death scenario, taking care of baby Catherine, when Isabella runs in. Her face is bruised. She has a cut under one of her ears. Her slippers are soaking wet. And she's like super out of breath and like bursting through the door like, Nelly, call me a carriage. I need to leave now for the town. And Nelly is like, girl, calm down. Tell me what happened. So Isabella explains about how she was, let's go back in time here, at Wuthering Heights. And it sucks over here because Heathcliff is Heathcliff. And her and Hindley are kind of, they're not friends, but you know, the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing. They're kind of an interesting duo. She explains about how Hindley had tried to like sober up and planned to go to Catherine's funeral, but then like couldn't go through with it. But now he's kind of like a sad drunk instead of a mad drunk. She says how earlier today, her and Hindley were sitting in the kitchen, hanging out, being like, wow, isn't life horrible? And Heathcliff is on his way home and Hindley is like, oh my god, wouldn't it be fun if we just locked him out? So they lock the door so Heathcliff can't come in. And then Hindley goes, you know what? Today is the day. I'm going to murder Heathcliff. He has apparently been like basically saying he's gonna murder Heathcliff every day since Heathcliff has come back. But like today he seems like really adamant about it. Like he's like, I got this gun. I'm gonna go murder Heathcliff. It's great. Isabella, not really wanting to be an accomplice to murder. Like she's not really in the mood for that today. So she goes to warn Heathcliff like through the window. She's like, oh my god, don't come inside. Hindley wants to murder you. And Heathcliff is like, let me in anyway. And Isabella says, come in and get shot, if you please. So Heathcliff breaks a window and then is like, Isabella, let me in the house. Hindley hears this, comes out to try and shoot Heathcliff, but Heathcliff grabs his gun through this window that he's broken and then shoots Hindley in like the wrist area, like somewhere in his arm, breaks into his own house of Wuthering Heights to beat Hindley up further. And then after Hindley is like knocked out, tends to the bullet wound that Heathcliff gave him. Quite the scenario. Isabella then, because she's also, literally like everybody in this book sucks. If you take one thing away from Wuthering Heights, is that nobody is likable. All of these people are cruel and mean, okay? Isabella tells Heathcliff that it's his fault that Catherine is dead. And then Heathcliff gets really mad at this and he throws a knife at Isabella. This is why she has like the cut under her ear. And Isabella runs away. And as she's running away, she sees Hindley fighting with Heathcliff again to stop him from going after her. She's run away to the Grange and she wants to get a carriage to leave. So after she tells Nelly this story, she like grabs some of her old things from the Grange, including her dog, and she leaves. And Isabella never returns. Into the penalty box she goes. After Isabella leaves, like I said, she never comes back. So they hear from her through letters and they learn that she ends up living somewhere near London. And a few months after she runs away, she has a son who she names Linton. Yes, that is correct. She names her son after her old last name. Totally not confusing at all. So simple to keep track of this family tree because everybody has such unique names. So Heathcliff does end up finding out about this child, and whenever he sees Nelly, he asks how the child is doing because he wants to have this child with him at some point because Linton, being a boy, is the heir of the Grange. So that means Heathcliff, through his son, could potentially get ownership of the Grange, which would be the ultimate revenge on Edgar here. Between just hating Heathcliff so much that he wants to avoid him at all costs and the death of his wife, Catherine, Edgar is now a hermit. He doesn't go anywhere ever. We also learn at this point that Edgar called Kathy Catherine despite everybody else calling her Catherine because Heathcliff called Catherine Kathy, and because of this Edgar then calls Catherine Kathy instead of calling her Catherine because he called Catherine Catherine instead of calling Catherine Kathy. Got it? 6 months after Catherine dies, Hindley dies. The Earnshaws are dropping like flies at the moment, okay? Catherine's died, Hindley is dead, Hareton is the only Earnshaw left at this point. Nelly, she goes to Wuthering Heights to plan Hindley's funeral and then also to attempt to take Hareton back to the Grange. However, we learn that Hindley's debt was absolutely insane. He was in debt up to his eyeballs. So Heathcliff basically owns everything he owns and is now going to take Hareton as his own so that he can just control him forever, I guess, and treat him as a servant in his own home, because Hareton, of course, would be inheriting Wuthering Heights, but because Hindley was in so much debt to Heathcliff, Hareton is now in debt to Heathcliff, so Heathcliff owns Hareton. Got it? So Nelly is forced to just go back to the Grange. Fast forward 10 years or so, Nelly is raising Catherine. Catherine is like a super spoiled child. She's kind of bratty. Edgar teaches her himself, and she's also very sheltered. She has no idea that Wuthering Heights, Heathcliff, or Hareton even exist because she's never allowed to leave Thrushcross Grange. This includes like all of the property it's on, so it's not like she's like locked in a room. It's just like she doesn't go anywhere unless her father is with her, and she definitely doesn't go anywhere near the Heights. He does not want her to know about all of this. Kathy has this desire to go see these cliffs where she has heard folklore about these like fairy caves, and she wants to go visit them, and Edgar is like, oh, maybe when you're older, not now, Kathy. Every month she's like, am I old enough? Am I old enough now? And then it's like a week later and she's like, how about now? Am I old enough? When Catherine is 13, Edgar gets a letter from Isabella saying that she is dying and she needs Edgar to come and take Linton back to Thrushcross Grange because she does not want Linton in the hands of Heathcliff. So Edgar, he goes on a little depressing vacation, and Isabella dies. So while Edgar is away, Nelly is taking care of Catherine. And Catherine, being the little spoiled brat that she is, she decides to go on a little adventure and run away from home on her pony named Minnie. Yes, I made a note for Minnie the pony. So Catherine runs away from home and Nelly goes to find her. And when she does find her, she discovers her at, you guessed it, Wuthering Heights. She's there with Hareton because both Heathcliff and Joseph are away, but there's also a new housekeeper. This is not Zilla, the present day housekeeper. This is a different housekeeper. Catherine is at the Heights with Hareton and this housekeeper. When Nelly finds her, she comes over here, okay, to be like, Catherine, what the heck? And here she learns that Hareton is her cousin, to which Catherine is like, you're wrong because my cousin is in London. And then Nelly has to be like, okay, so like people can actually have more than one cousin. You can have two cousins. And then Nelly is like, okay, let's get out of here before Heathcliff gets back. Minnie's gone in the penalty box. And then Catherine and Nelly are coming back home, baby. So back at the Grange, Nelly tells Catherine that she has to promise to not tell her father when he gets back that she has been to Wuthering Heights. Edgar then comes home, okay? And he has Linton with him. Linton is a very weak and sick boy. He is also very annoying. And the same evening that Linton arrives, Catherine is like, oh my God, my cousin is here. This is amazing. I love you. This is so great. We're going to have so much fun. I can't wait for us to become besties. And that night, Catherine and Linton, they go to bed. And guess who shows up? Joseph. He shows up at the door and Nelly is like, dude, go home. And he's like, actually, I am not going to be doing that because I need to talk to Edgar. And Nelly's like, he can talk to you tomorrow. And Joseph is like, actually, he's going to talk to me right now. And Joseph tells Edgar about how he has been told by Heathcliff to take Linton back home to his father. And because Edgar really doesn't have any say, he has to let Linton go, but he says that Nelly will bring Linton in the morning because it is too late tonight to be doing so. Joseph goes back to Wuthering Heights, and then the next morning, Nelly takes Linton super early in the morning before Catherine even wakes up, because Edgar's like, I don't want to hurt her by having him leave while she's awake. It's like, she's gonna find out, dude. I don't know what you're protecting her from. Linton is like, I just got here though, like I don't want to leave, and also I've literally never heard of my father before. So he's like being really adamant about like not going to Wuthering Heights, and Nelly convinces him to come with her. She just straight up lies to him and says that like his father really wants to see him and that he'll be back soon to visit. None of that's happening. Like, she knows he's not coming back soon. She knows that is a lie. So Nelly brings Linton to, I feel like the housekeeper looks like she's married to Heathcliff if I put her there, so I'm gonna move her up. Nelly brings Linton to Heathcliff, and Heathcliff is like, wow. So this is my son, this weak boy who looks nothing like me and is super annoying. Kind of a disappointment, not gonna lie, but whatever, because he is going to make me the owner of the Grange, and that is all I want, because revenge is my life. Nelly then leaves Wuthering Heights, literally while Linton is calling after her and being like, don't leave me here, Nelly, don't do this. And then Nelly's like, bye, have fun. So, of course, Catherine then wakes up and is like, hey, where's that cousin who was just here? And then Edgar and Nelly, yet again, just straight up lie to children. And they're like, oh, he's gone to go live with his father. And he's definitely nowhere near here. He's really far away. But maybe he'll come visit sometime. But you might as well just forget about him because you only knew him for one day. Just forget about it, sweetheart. So Linton is living secluded at Wuthering Heights. Nobody ever sees him. Catherine is living secluded at Thrushcross Grange. 2 years after Linton arrives, this housekeeper leaves. She just full on quits. I wonder why. Okay, she's on the floor now. And this is when Zilla arrives as the housekeeper. And so Nelly would often ask Zilla when they were both in town. She would like ask how Linton's doing. And she would just basically say like, well, Heathcliff hates him. Honestly, everybody kind of hates him. He's like really annoying and demanding, and he's always sick all the time. When Kathy turns 16 on her 16th birthday, which is also, of course, the 16th anniversary of her mother's death, she's like, let's celebrate. Edgar is like not really in a celebrating mood. So she goes like, Father, can I go out on the moors to find the grouse with Nelly? And he's like, yeah, sure, but like only for an hour. So Catherine is like, great, Nelly, let's go find these birds. They head out on the moors, put them in nowhere land. Just out on the moors, living life, looking for grouse. Catherine kind of just keeps going farther and farther away, and Nelly is like, whoa, maybe come back, until finally they end up running into Heathcliff and Hareton on the moors. Catherine is like, oh, is this your son? And Heathcliff is like, that's not my son. And Nelly is like, maybe we should go home, Catherine. And Heathcliff is like, but I do have a son and you should come meet him. And Kathy's like, oh my God, yeah, let me go to Wuthering Heights and go meet your son. This sounds amazing. So they end up going to Wuthering Heights, and on their way, Heathcliff tells Nelly about how he has this secret plan that's not really that secret, because he's telling her about how he wants Linton and Catherine to fall in love and get married, because then he can guarantee he will own Thrushcross Grange and get his revenge on Edgar. So Heathcliff is like, I'm playing matchmaker here. They show up at the Heights, and Catherine does not recognize Linton at first, but then is like, oh my God, it's my cousin. You're like actually not that far away. Weird. Because I was told you were actually quite far away. Heathcliff is like, Linton, how about you go show Kathy the gardens? And Linton is like, okay, but like I just came inside and my shoes are wet and I'm like kind of tired, so I don't really want to do that. Heathcliff is like, okay, Hareton, how about you take Kathy to go look at the gardens? While Hareton and Kathy are gone, Heathcliff fully admits that he treats Hareton the exact same way Hindley treated him, but also he's not going to stop treating Hareton horribly because he still hates Hindley and is again living off of revenge. So he will continue to treat Hareton horribly. Heathcliff then forces Linton to go outside with Hareton and Catherine, and Nelly overhears Catherine and Linton making fun of Hareton for not being able to read the inscription above the door, because of course Hareton can't read because Heathcliff took away his education the way Hindley took away Heathcliff's. So after a few hours, Catherine and Nelly then head back to the Grange. And Kathy is like, why has everybody been lying to me my entire life? Like, what's up with this? Kind of mean. I didn't know about my uncle. I didn't know my cousin was living over there. And like for a while, I also didn't know this other guy was my cousin. Like, what's going on? Why would you lie to me about Linton being so close when you know I wanted to go see him? And Edgar tells her the truth about how Heathcliff is actually just like a horrible person, and he is sure that he hates Catherine just for being the daughter of Edgar, and that Heathcliff would use Catherine just to get back at Edgar. Catherine is like, okay, but like what about Linton? I promised him I would come back again tomorrow. Can I at least write him a letter? And they're like, absolutely not. You cannot write him a letter, because if you write him a letter, then he's gonna write you a letter, and then you're just gonna keep writing each other letters, and that's not gonna happen. You can't go back there. Communication ends now. But as we learn, Catherine actually did send a letter. She secretly wrote a letter and had the milkman, who's actually a boy, deliver it to Wuthering Heights. She then starts acting super suspicious, and Nelly finds out that she has this drawer full of letters, love letters between Catherine and Linton. They have been communicating back and forth all this time. They're writing love letters to each other. So Nelly steals all of her letters, and then Catherine is like, Nelly, I need to talk to you. And Nelly is like, oh, I found all of these letters. Catherine, you were not supposed to be talking to Linton. You know how your father feels. I'm gonna have to tell him all about this. And Catherine is like, no, please don't. I'll promise. I'll stop. Oh my God, don't give the letters to Dad. Burn them before you do that. And Nelly's like, promise you'll never write to Linton again. And she's like, I promise. So Nelly burns all the letters and doesn't tell Edgar about them. And then Nelly the next day sends a letter in the same way Catherine would normally send her letters, telling Linton that he is no longer allowed to write letters to Kathy. At this point, Edgar starts becoming ill. He's a little weak. He's a little cough. He's a little sick. Nelly is out for a walk with Kathy, because normally Edgar would go for the walk with them, but because he's sick, he can't, so Nelly goes with her. Kathy is like climbing on this wall to reach like fruit in a tree when she loses her hat on the other side of the wall, jumps down to grab her hat, but then she can't get back over the wall, and like the gate is locked, and Nelly is like, oh, hold on, I'll have to go get the key. But then who is outside of the gate, you may ask? Heathcliff. Heathcliff is also outside this gate. He's like, oh my God, Catherine, so weird running into you here. Linton, he's been missing you so much, and he's actually now like really sick. Like he's like dying, and the only thing that could possibly save him would be seeing you, because you know you're just like so important, and you're like the only good thing that was in his life. You should come visit him because it would make him better. And Nelly is like on the other side of this wall being like, oh hell nah, Heathcliff, stop telling lies, okay? Don't be at that. And then after Catherine gets back into the Grange, Nelly is trying to tell her, don't trust what Heathcliff is saying. He's probably just lying to you, and Linton is probably fine. He's probably not dying. But Kathy is like having nothing of it. So the next day they go to visit Wuthering Heights to see Linton. Nelly is hoping that like she'll see that Linton is fine, and then realize that Heathcliff was lying. Heathcliff, while he was there, was also saying he's going to be away from Wuthering Heights for quite a few days. That means that Nelly and Catherine can go visit the Heights, and Heathcliff won't be there. So the next day they go to the Heights. Nelly and Catherine back at Wuthering Heights yet again. They find out that only Linton and Joseph are home when they go to visit, and Linton actually is kind of sick, but he's also just like self-pitying and like super annoying again. He's not as sick as he like seems to imply that he is, and everybody in the house kind of just ignores him because he's really demanding and annoying. Nelly and Catherine are like nice to him. They like stoke the fire and like get him some water and whatnot. Linton and Catherine start fighting over their fathers, and they're both like, your father's a liar and sucks, and the other one's like, no, your father is a liar and sucks. And then Kathy gets upset and like pushes the chair that Linton is in a bit, and then Linton like falls into this like dramatic coughing fit, and then is like, why would you do this to me? You're so mean, Kathy. And that makes Kathy feel bad, and then seeing that he can make Kathy feel bad by being sick, he just like keeps acting that up, and then she like stays to like continue to take care of him, and she's like, he feels better when I'm here. I'll come back again tomorrow, Linton. And Nelly's like, no, you will not. So after a few hours, they go back to the Grange. Because it was like kind of wet and cold when they were gone to visit, upon getting back, Nelly ends up getting sick. So now both Edgar and Nelly are sick at Thrushcross Grange, which means that Catherine is spending her day going back and forth between Edgar and Nelly, taking care of them. And in the evening, Nelly doesn't need her help with anything else, and Edgar goes to bed super early, so Catherine has her evenings to herself. And we find out that she has secretly been going to Wuthering Heights like every day to see Linton in the evenings, which means that she's spending her day taking care of Edgar and Nelly, they then just go to Wuthering Heights and take care of Linton. Girl, that's like 2 full-time jobs. 3 weeks later, Nelly is healthy enough to leave her room, okay, and like be back in the library. And then Catherine starts acting kind of funny because she's like, Nelly, aren't you tired? Don't you want to go to bed? And Nelly's like, no, I'm fine. Read some books. And then Kathy's like, I think maybe I'm tired and should go to bed. And Nelly's like, no, you're fine. This happens for a few days. And then one evening, Kathy says, you know what? I have a headache, so I'm going to go to bed. And then when Nelly goes up to check on her later, she sees that Catherine is gone. And this is when she finds out that Catherine has secretly been going all the time to see Linton, because she looks out the window and she sees Catherine coming home on Minnie the Pony, because apparently Catherine has bribed the groom with books to get her pony so she can go back and forth from the Heights to the Grange all the time on her secret mission visits. Kathy then tells Nelly all. She's like, yes, I have been going to Wuthering Heights. And she tells her about this one visit when she showed up. Hareton greeted her and he was like, oh, Kathy, I can read the inscription on the door now. And then she asks him to read the date. And he says, well, I don't know my numbers yet. And she continues to laugh at him again because, again, Catherine is not a nice person. None of these people are nice people. She also says about how on like one of her visits when like Linton was sick, he like said it was like Kathy's fault. And then she's like, well, I'll never come back again. And then Linton was like, wait, hold up, you should come back. Linton is like very manipulative of Kathy and like acts up his sickness all the time to make her feel bad. So Nelly's like, I have to tell your father. When Catherine tells Edgar about this, Edgar says, well, you're no longer allowed to go to Wuthering Heights, but I'll write a letter and say that Linton can come visit Thrushcross Grange. At this point in the book, we learn from the present day people that the events that we're talking about now was actually just about 1 year ago. So we're almost at the present day, which is like kind of a wild thing to think about. Nelly also in the present day is like, wouldn't it be great if you fell in love with Catherine Linton, who is now Catherine Heathcliff stuck at Wuthering Heights, present day? That would be so great. You could save her. And Lockwood is like, oh, I could see myself falling in love with her, but I don't think she would ever love me. Back to our story. Catherine is like, great, thanks, father. I'll never go to Wuthering Heights again. But Linton also never comes to the Grange. And Edgar tells Nelly about how he would let Catherine marry Linton if it would make her happy, that he doesn't really care about Thrushcross Grange anymore. He just wants her to be happy. And if marrying Linton would make her happy, he'd be happy to have that. And so both Linton and Edgar at this point are both pretty sickly. And Edgar agrees to let Kathy meet Linton in the no man's land of the moors. Kathy and Nelly go on their little adventure over to the moors yet again. Here we're back. In their letters, they agreed to meet Linton in this kind of like middle spot where it's like it's not on the grounds of Wuthering Heights because that was Edgar's rule, but Linton is not there and they find him farther into Wuthering Heights. And it's because he's like on the grounds of Wuthering Heights. He's outside, but he's like really sick and weak. And they're like, why are you out here? Like, you're too sick to be here. You should be inside. And Linton is all like, no, I'm fine. I'm actually doing better than I have been. Can you not see me being so healthy right now? And he's like acting really like weird and fidgety. And he's like, definitely tell your father that I'm doing great. I'm super healthy right now. But at the same time, he like can barely get up and he's just like lying there on Kathy, like basically having a nap the entire time that they're visiting. They have this like super weird kind of feeling meeting and Catherine's like, okay, well, Linton, like we have to go now, but we'll see you next week. Catherine and Nelly, look, I'm not moving them because they're just going to move again in 2 seconds. But they go back to the Grange. Catherine is like taking care of Edgar because he's even more sick in the next week. But reluctantly, she goes to meet Linton because she did promise she would go see him. So they're back in the middle of nowhere's land again to see Linton. And Linton is like even worse than before. He's acting like super desperate. He's in the exact same place that he was last time. And we learn that basically Heathcliff has like locked Linton out of the house until he gets Catherine to come come into Wuthering Heights with him. Heathcliff shows up and he manages to have Catherine lead Linton into Wuthering Heights, and Nelly goes with Heathcliff. And then when they're in Wuthering Heights, Heathcliff literally then locks the door, so they're now hostages at Wuthering Heights, and he puts Nelly up in a room with Kathy, and then the next day takes Kathy out of the room, but Nelly is still locked in there. Nelly's locked in this room for 5 days until she's finally let out of the room by Zillah, and Nelly comes downstairs to find Linton. Linton tells her how he and Kathy are now married, and he now owns everything at Thrushcross Grange. And Nelly is like, how dare you be this happy? We've been hostages here for a week. Linton also tells Nelly that Catherine is locked in another room, and Nelly decides that she is going to go back to the Grange before Heathcliff comes back because he's away at the moment, and she will try and think of some way to save Kathy in a different way. So Nelly ends up running away, got her freedom back. So Nelly's back at the Grange. Edgar at this point is doing absolutely atrociously. He is not doing well at all. Super sick, on his deathbed, life's not great. So Nelly gets back and she tells Edgar that, oh, Kathy and Linton are married. She's gonna be home soon, like, don't worry. She doesn't want to tell him like the whole hostage situation part because, you know, he's dying. She wants him to think that like his daughter's like happy. So again, Nelly's just straight up lying to people. Edgar says that he wants to change his will so that Thrushcross Grange goes to a group of trustees instead of going to Linton when he dies, so that Heathcliff can't get ownership of it. So Nelly calls for the lawyer, and the lawyer is taking like his good sweet time showing up. In the meantime, Kathy, she shows up at the Grange and she says that finally Linton was really nice and helped her to escape by leaving the door unlocked for her to like escape out a window, and she like ran here. So she's able to be with her father while he dies. And again, her and Nelly agree to like not tell him about the whole like being hostage and life sucking thing, and she actually instead is like, no, I'm super happy, life's great, I'm so glad to be married to Linton. And then Edgar, once he's already dead, is when the lawyer Mr. Green shows up, and what we learn is that Mr. Green is actually completely bought by Heathcliff. So Heathcliff forced him to just be busy until after Edgar was dead so that Edgar couldn't change his will. And then after he is dead, Mr. Green, this lawyer, decides to try and take over all the arrangements for like Edgar's funeral, but Nelly steps in and insists that they follow his will, which says that Edgar is to be buried next to Catherine on that hill that overlooks the moors instead of in the Linton grave site area. After Edgar's funeral, Nelly and Kathy are at the Grange and they're like, wow, what a week. Guess who shows up? Heathcliff. Also, Mr. Green is gone. Mr. Green can go in the penalty box. Heathcliff has shown up to take Catherine back to Wuthering Heights and says that he is going to find a tenant for Thrushcross Grange. Nelly asks that she switch positions with Zillah so that she can go with Kathy at Wuthering Heights, and Heathcliff says, absolutely not, Nelly, you're staying here, and if I need to talk to you, I'm going to come to Thrushcross Grange. You are not to visit Wuthering Heights and talk to Kathy. He then tells the most absurd story in existence. People don't talk about this enough. Okay? People need to talk about this more. Heathcliff then tells Nelly about how he was watching over Edgar being buried, told the people who were digging the grave to dig up Kathy's grave so that he could lift open her coffin and see her face. And he's like, oh my God, she still looks like Kathy. She died like 18 years ago at this point, my dude. Like, there's no way she looked recognizable. And he's there like, oh my God, it's Kathy. She's not going to decompose until I die. And then he says how he had them rip open a side of Kathy's coffin, but on the side that's not next to Edgar, the other side of it, so that then when he dies, he can rip off the side of his coffin so that both of their coffins are like open on the sides facing each other, and that way when both of them are decomposing, they can decompose into the earth together. And he tells Nelly about how she's finally stopped haunting him at this point, because for the past like 18 years, Catherine has been haunting Heathcliff, because when she first died, he admits that he also dug up her grave then. He has dug up her grave twice. But the first time he was going to rip open her coffin because he wanted to hold her again. But before he did, he like got this like sense that Catherine was like around him up on the ground. So he like buried her back in and then was like, great, she's up on the earth with me. She's haunting me everywhere. This man is insane. He dug up her grave 18 years after she died so he could look at her. At this point, Catherine is now ready to go back to Wuthering Heights, so they go. Now, because Nelly can never go to Wuthering Heights, she knows nothing about Kathy other than what she hears from Zillah. So 6 weeks before Lockwood arrived, Zillah told Nelly about Catherine showing up at Wuthering Heights and how basically nobody really acknowledged her and nobody would help her, and she was basically told that she would have to like make her own way at Wuthering Heights. She'd have to earn her keep or whatever. And she finds that like Linton is quite sick, but nobody will call a doctor for him, so she is forced to nurse him herself, and she nurses him until I totally forgot to put Edgar up as being dead. Edgar died. Like, I was here talking about his funeral and I forgot to mark that he died. My bad. But at this point, Linton is now deceased, okay? Because nobody would get him a doctor and Catherine had to take care of him. And at this point, Catherine now hates everybody in this house because, like, nobody would help her take care of her dying husband that she was forced to marry when she was taken hostage into the home. Like, I kind of get her resentment at this point, you know? Like, I get why you're mad. But Zillah is like, she's not very nice. Like, Zillah, I wonder why. I wonder why she's not very nice. Look at the environment she's in. Zillah also mentions that it seems like Hareton would, like to be friends with her. Like, he kind of has this little, like, obsession with her. Like, he stares at her all the time. And this one time, he was, like, just, like, watching her and then, like, really wanted to, like, touch her hair and then did. But then she, like, freaked out about him touching her hair and was like, stop touching me! That's a thing, I guess. At this point, Nelly's story has come to an end. We're now back in present day. And Lockwood is like, oh man, now that I'm like over this cold and I've heard all of the tea from the last 30 years, I am going to go to Wuthering Heights and I'm going to tell Heathcliff that I am going to be leaving and he's going to have to get a new tenant in October. At this point, it's like January. So he moved in last October. It's now January. And he's like, I am never spending another winter here again. I am leaving. I am going to go tell Heathcliff this. And Nelly is like, oh, well, when you go, can you like take a letter to Kathy for me? Lockwood goes to Wuthering Heights and Heathcliff is not there, but Hareton and Kathy are, and he tries to like super like coyly like sleight of hand like give Kathy the letter, but instead she's like, what is this? And he's like, it's a letter from Nelly. And then Hareton is like, I actually think Heathcliff would really like to see this, and takes it from her, but then afterwards feels bad and then gives the letter back to Kathy. So then Kathy does get the letter from Nelly. Kathy tells Lockwood that she can't write any letters back to Nelly because she doesn't have any materials for it, because she doesn't even have any books anymore. And she says how she knows that Hareton has stolen her books that she brought with her, and he's like keeping them in his room and trying to teach himself to read. And then she like makes fun of him yet again for not being able to read, and Hareton like gets really upset about this and goes and grabs all of the books, brings them down to her, and he's like, here's your books back. And she's like, I won't even be able to enjoy them anymore because I'll just think about you like not being able to read them. And so then Hareton takes all the books and throws them in the fire, because again, Catherine is not a nice person. None of these people are likable. Everybody in this book sucks. Hareton then leaves and Heathcliff arrives, and Lockwood tells Heathcliff of his intentions to leave, but says he will pay his rent for the rest of the year as agreed, but he is going to be going to London and will not be at Thrushcross Grange anymore because he does not like it. Heathcliff asks him to stay for dinner, and like dinner is like the most awkward thing you've ever seen in existence. Like, this is even worse than the snowstorm experience at this point. And then as he's leaving, Lockwood is like, oh man, imagine if I did fall in love with Catherine and then like saved her by being her like Prince Charming or whatever. But he doesn't do that, and instead he just goes away. Into the penalty box you go, sir. So then later that year, time has passed. Lockwood is traveling nearby to visit a friend, and he's like, hold on, I'm so close to Thrushcross Grange, why don't I go there so that I can just stay there the night since I'm still the tenant? So Lockwood shows up at the Grange. I'm going to remove this for now. And he comes across this housekeeper and he's like, oh, where's Nelly? I'm going to be staying the day. And they're like, oh, Nelly's not here anymore. She is at Wuthering Heights. And he's like, oh, okay, well, I'm the tenant here, so can you set a room up for me? And they're like, sure, we'll get right on that. We didn't know you were coming. He's like, that's okay. I'm just gonna go to Wuthering Heights and go say hi to Nelly while you guys get it all ready. Okay, like, I'll see you soon. Bye. So he goes on a little journey. He walks over to Wuthering Heights where he comes to Nelly and he's like, oh, Nelly, is Heathcliff here? Because I was in the area and I was like, I might as well come by and settle the last bit of my lease with Heathcliff while I'm here. And Nelly is like, oh my God, did you not hear? And he's like, hear what? Obviously, I have not heard things. And she's like, oh, Heathcliff died a couple months ago. Nelly then tells Lockwood yet another story about how she was called to Wuthering Heights a few months ago because Zilla left. She was like, I'm done with this. See ya. So she was back at Wuthering Heights. Nelly also brought Catherine some more books from the Grange to be like, look, I brought you more of your favorite things. And that after a while, Catherine felt bad about teasing Hareton for not being able to read. And so she would try and leave books open all over the place to try and tempt him to try and read again. But it wouldn't work. He was kind of really put off of the reading thing because of all of her insults. And then a little bit before Easter in March, Hareton had hurt himself while he was hunting, with his gun, so he couldn't go anywhere, so he's kind of stuck inside. And then on Easter, because Joseph was gone and Heathcliff was away, Hareton and Catherine were in the kitchen, and she had this big speech of apologizing, and she's like, I actually don't hate you, but you hate me. And he's like, why would you think I hate you when I've been on your side with the whole Heathcliff thing? And she's like, oh, I didn't even know. And then she gifts him a book and is like, if you accept my apologies, I'll teach you how to read. And then he does. And now they're super friendly and she's teaching him to read and it's super cute. Now that they're friends, the next day, Hareton and Catherine are out in the garden and they have dug up these bushes that apparently were Joseph bushes. He loved those bushes because Kathy wanted a little bit of a garden. And then later at dinner, Joseph storms in and he's all really mad about these bushes. And Heathcliff is like, dude, what the hell are you mad about? What is going on here? And Hareton is like, oh, I forgot they were his bushes. I just took up a bit of the land because we were going to plant a garden. And then Heathcliff is like, why do you think you can plant a garden? You don't own anything here. All of this is mine. And then Kathy gets super mad at Heathcliff and she's telling him all of these things. He's taken everything from her. Heathcliff then grabs Kathy by the hair and it looks like he's going to really beat her up or whatever. But then he suddenly stops and releases her and it's just leave. Get out of my sight before I hurt you. Kind of strange behavior for Heathcliff. Heathcliff then tells Hareton that if he listens to Kathy again and does what she says, that he's gonna basically kick him out. Then another day, Heathcliff comes home, finds Catherine and Hareton together yet again, but he kind of just ignores it. And he comes inside, he's like, I just don't have this revenge thing in me anymore. Both of them just remind me so much of their mother. And I don't have any evil left in me. I feel like I've changed. At this point, Heathcliff becomes really weirdly solitary and he's barely eating anything and leaves one night and is away the entire night. And when he comes back, he's extremely joyful. He seems possessed by something. He is so happy, just smiling, and he never does that. And it's really super weird. That night, after he comes home after being away the entire night, he spends that night in that haunted room instead of his own bedroom. And he's kind of muttering the entire night. He's doing some real weird things, okay? He's acting kind of ooky spooky. And the next morning, he's still acting super weird, standing in the room and talking to somebody who isn't there and is acting like he can see stuff that isn't there. And Nelly is I'm super duper creeped out by this. I don't want to be anywhere near you right now because I don't really like the vibes. He's like, Nelly, I need you to make sure that my burial wishes are held to, those weird ones where he wants him and Catherine to decompose together because both of their coffins are open. That desire, yeah, he wants to make sure that's followed. And she's like, okay, kind of weird that you're like talking about your death, but whatever. So he then goes to bed, and the next morning Nelly is like walking around the house, and it was like pouring rain all last night, but she looks and she can see that Heathcliff's window is open, and she goes to his room where she finds him in his bed. The window is open, he's soaking wet from the rain, he's smiling like crazy, and his eyes are open, but he's dead. Nelly then tries to close his eyes because he's dead. They will not be closed. Like, it's giving super spooky. I don't like it. He's kind of haunted. I don't know about this. And like, nobody wanted to be near his body, but like Hareton would sit by him the entire night and like cry, because I guess like in a way he kind of ended up liking Heathcliff. I don't really get it. Before he did die, there's like this one point where Heathcliff kind of tells Nelly that I feel like I would like Hareton if he was my son instead of Hindley's, like because he's Hindley's son, I hated him, but like he's actually not that bad. Because he's dead, they call Mr. Kenneth, the doctor. He's back. He comes by and he's like, I have no idea what he died from. Like, it's a mysterious cause of death. He clearly wasn't ill. It's not like he starved. He just kind of like died. Mr. Kenneth gone again. So they end up burying Heathcliff as he wishes so he can decompose with Kathy. And Edgar and Kathy and Heathcliff are together on this hill in death. And Nelly tells Lockwood about how like everybody around town say that they can like see Heathcliff and Kathy like walking the moors, like they haunt everything. And Lockwood, on his way back to the Grange, passes by their graves himself, and he doesn't see how anybody can believe that these three people could not be resting any more peacefully than they are. Lockwood is back at the Grange at this point. We end Wuthering Heights with kind of a happy ending, other than the fact that like everybody is dead except for Hareton and Catherine. And somehow Joseph, he's been an old man the entire time. So I guess loving the Bible has really gotten him somewhere. But we end the story with Hareton and Catherine. They end up getting married in the new year, and it's like a happy little ending for the two of them. They both have kind of finally escaped the cycle of abuse that their families had put them into, and like all of the revenge and stuff. It finally dies with Heathcliff, and then they're able to be happy, and Nelly is just there. And that's Wuthering Heights. So I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, please make sure to give it a like. I put a lot of effort into this, so I would love to know your thoughts on this down below. If you would like me to explain other classic novels in like a similar vein like this, do let me know. Also let me know what ones you would want me to read and explain to you, because as much work as this was, it also was really fun. I would consider doing more in the future. I love this book. I feel Wuthering Heights, it's one of those books that you will be thinking about long after you finish reading it. I was rereading it in order to do this project here, and as I was reading it, I was like, I forgot how good this book was. And I think a lot of people who don't like it end up not liking it because everybody sucks and there are no likable characters, but that is kind of like the whole point of it. It's like, wow, you can't root for anybody here. Like, everybody sucks, and the negativity of everybody and the abuse everybody gives to everybody else is like all like is interconnected and cycles through. And like I said before, not enough people talk about the fact that Heathcliff digs up Kathy's grave twice. The first time I read Wuthering Heights, I gave it 4.5 stars, but honestly, after doing this, I think I might bump it up to a 5-star read. I really think this is such a good book, and I would continue to read it over and over again. Every time I read it, I do find new things I like. I do find new quotes that I find hilarious. Yeah, that's it. I'm gonna sign off here. I hope you're having a wonderful day today, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.